Okay.
Great. Welcome, everybody. We appreciate you taking some time this afternoon to join us for the second in a series of webinars that the Distance Education Affinity Group has put together. I'm Jake Farbin. I'm the Executive Director of your statewide Center for Student Success at the Council of County Colleges. We hope you find these webinars to be helpful and informative. I have a very brief speaking role on the front end, and then we'll get it over to our content experts who will be able to provide some terrific information on authentic student assessments in a virtual learning environment. So let's go to the next slide. As I mentioned, they twist my arm to do that. Look at that handsome devil. I'm Jake Farbin with the Center for Student Success. If we can go to the next slide, please. So just a few housekeeping rules, as I mentioned earlier when we first started. If you could please just turn all of your microphones off, just because we don't want to create feedback. We don't want to crash the system. It's not that we don't want to hear you. We just want to make sure we can get through this in the limited hours time we have for this. We'll take all questions. If you can add your questions, if you can include your questions in the chat, you'll see there's a chat function button. If you scroll your mouse at the bottom, if you're not familiar with Zoom, you'll be able to push that chat button, and you'll see the chat room on the right of your screen. So please put your questions in the chat, and we'll answer your questions at the end of the presentation. Also, if you're not presenting, if you can turn off your camera. Again, it's not that we don't want to see you. We appreciate you being with us. However, we just don't want to crash the system and overburden anyone's broadband or wireless capabilities. And then finally, let me just let you know who's on the line presenting for us today. That we don't have slides for this per se, but let's see if I can go from memory. Kicking us off will be Vivian Lynn, the Dean of eLearning at Ocean County College. And then Shannon Osborne-Jones, the Assistant Director of eLearning at Middlesex County College. And then Amarjit Kaur, who's the Managing Director for Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning at Bergen Community College. Also presenting today will be Robert Obermeier, an analyst for MercerOnline at Mercer County Community College, and Vicente Erazo, the manager of MercerOnline at Mercer County Community College. Also presenting today will be Archana Bhandari, the Executive Director at Distance Learning at Hudson County Community College, and we're quarterbacked and facilitated by our dauntless leader. We like to call her Dr. Awesome from Essex County Community College, the Vice Chair of the Distance Education Affinity Group, Dr. Lee Bella DeCastro. So again, thank you everybody for being with us. I'm going to turn it over to our content experts at this time.
Next slide. Lita, you want to go back and for the agenda, we want to move forward. So, so the agenda for today is learning outcomes. What is authentic assessment, formative and summative assessment, examples of formative assessment, academic integrity, best practices, resources, and then we're going to have a Q&A. We want to spend most of our time with the Q&A. We're going to provide you an overview and be able to give you detailed information after the presentation. Next slide.
And one thing to note, if you do have questions, please make sure that you put them into the chat, and we will handle all of the questions at the end of the presentation.
We need to embrace technology to make learning more engaging, because when students are engaged and they are interested, that's where learning takes place. Next slide. Just to introduce myself again, I'm Vivian Lynn, the Dean for eLearning of Ocean County College. And hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Next slide. Measurable outcomes. So broadly speaking, and for the presentation purposes only, we need to agree that there are two types of outcomes for academia when it comes to the curriculum: program outcomes and learning outcomes. Program learning outcomes, or should I say performance, describes what we want a program to do or accomplish. Program outcomes could be as simple as a completion of a task or an activity like graduation, certification, internship, and that list goes on. It's a pretty extensive list, but program outcomes usually have a quantitative target. The components of the measurable program outcomes are similar to learning outcomes, but there's one exception and a major exception. The focus is on the success of the program. Let me repeat that. The program, not the student. When program outcomes are aligned with the program's curriculum goals, these steps are usually done by curriculum mapping. Curriculum mapping is the process of indexing and putting a diagram of a curriculum to identify academic gaps, redundancies, and misalignments. I believe that curriculum mapping is the gatekeeper that helps us to improve the overall course study. Now, I know you all have seen it. It's the matrix, and I'm not talking about Neo from the Matrix, but that diagram that you have the program outcomes, the learning objectives, and that sequential order, how the students are going to get to the end. It helps clarify the relationship between what you're assessing at that program level and what should be taught at the course level effectively. The outcomes developed in the plan need to be consistent with the curriculum goals of the program in which they are taught. You almost always have to keep in mind that program goals dictate the course goals since assessment is program focused. Some of the more commonly used of assessment methods for evaluating program outcome does not provide you with the information for improvement, but on effectiveness on what you want the program to accomplish. Once again, is the graduation, certification, internship. So that we're crystal clear, program outcomes describe what a program is expected to accomplish. So let's talk about learning outcomes. Learning outcomes describe what the student should possess and demonstrate based on the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities upon completion of their learning experience. So their experience really should be, your plan should always be student first, student centric. What are they trying to do? Next, the learning experience. What's the process? How well are they doing? And lastly, the learning outcome, the product. What can we do to improve it? In order to obtain the desired product of learning outcome, there has to be a systematic and ongoing process collecting, interpreting the intended goal and outcomes to support the overall institution program goals. As stated before, learning outcomes are about the student and how they're going to demonstrate upon completion of the course or the sequence of courses or a program. The learning outcomes are not about you, the instructor, but provide the overview of what the students can do when they completely finish at the end. When you have a clear articulation of the learning outcomes, it becomes a pillar of the foundation to evaluate the effectiveness of teaching and the learning process. So how do you create an effective learning outcome? You have to focus on the student's behavior. It needs to be simple, not complex or compound, specific and well-defined. It has to be realistic, and if it's not realistic, it's not attainable. And you can use Bloom's or any other taxonomy to show how to tackle this task. So it must have action, and it has to be in future tense. Once again, action verbs is critical and something that the students are going to obtain in the future. It has to align with the appropriate assessment method. And lastly, it has to have clearly state desires for the performance criteria, which really is specific, measurable, observable terms that are acceptable to a specific course or program. So my colleagues will talk more about the assessment, which is a systematic ongoing process of collecting and interpreting and acting the information on the related goals. But one of the things I want to share with you with the end in mind is that you consider to use backward design model. When designing or redesigning a course, whether it's just for your lecture, your discussion, the backward approach is the structure that you can assist students with learning based upon the assessments. So the first step in the backward course design is clearly to articulate the final results. What do you want the student to know? Cognitive outcome. What do you want the students to think? Affective outcome. And what do you want the students to do? Behavior outcome. What evidence will the student provide to continue to demonstrate that they have achieved the course learning outcomes? The answer is assessment. Now I'll pass the presentation on to my colleagues that can talk more detail about the assessments. But as long as you understand that you can't have an assessment unless you have clear program and learning outcomes. Shannon?
Hello, thank you very much, Vivian. That was it's going to be a tough act to follow that. Nice to meet you all. I'm Shannon Osborne-Jones. I'm the Assistant Director of eLearning at Middlesex County College. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you about what is authentic assessment. I thought I switched these around, but I didn't. So anyway, here we've made it. This semester, which has been like no other, is finally drawing to a close. Can I get a hands up? Some of your Zoom sessions are probably getting ready. You're starting to think about finals. You're thinking about how you're going to finish this semester. And some of your Zoom sessions are probably reviews of all that. And it's always this time of the year or this time of the semester that I always get my favorite question when it comes to assessment. I sit down with my students and I say, let's get ready to review for the final exam. What questions do you have? What would you like to learn? And what do they always ask? How many questions are on the final? Are any of them going to be multiple choice? And since I teach languages, that's always a bit of an issue because anyway, at the end of the day, that's what the students ask and that's what they want to know. And unfortunately, maybe it's because they've been taught to the test for so long. Next slide, please. That's where we're at. They forget what the actual purpose of their final exam is for. We've sort of lost that connection between an ongoing assessment all the way through and then we get to the end. So what I want to talk to you about this today is as two separate points of view. The first point of view is that how do you prepare for your probably first ever, maybe your last online final? And how are you going to ensure that your students don't cheat without you sitting there looking over them? That's going to be the first point of view. And then the second little point of view is going to be a little bit more long term. As you're planning teaching remote over the summer, or maybe you're thinking, this wasn't as bad as I thought, maybe I'll look into teaching some proper online classes going forward. How do you plan assessment for online course? And the answer to both of these points of view is the same. Both of these types of questions is the same. And it all comes down to authentic assessment. So what exactly do we mean by authentic assessment? Next slide, please. The first thing about authentic assessment is that it is realistic, okay? What that means is that students can relate it back to the course outcomes, they can relate it to the learning objectives, they can see a purpose for it. It's not just a test thrown out there. Gone are the days of the pop quizzes just to scare the students. Authentic assessment also requires judgment and innovation, okay? This is where we want to look at Bloom's taxonomy and we want to push our students to those higher levels of learning. It's all well and good to be able to memorize a bunch of facts and repeat it through rote memorization, but at the end of the day, that's the stuff that makes it easy for the students to be able to cheat, and it's not really showing that they are taking on that knowledge that we want to give them. Authentic assessment also allows a lot of opportunities to rehearse. The best examples of authentic assessment involve chances to rehearse and to practice, to reach out to experts and to do peer reviews in order for students to improve as they go along, as they work their way up to the final assessment at the end of the semester. And it assesses the students' ability to use knowledge. The students are doing what they're supposed to be doing with the course rather than just spitting out facts. And as Vivian pointed out, it needs to align with the course objectives. Next slide, please. Since we're requiring students to apply what they've learned as opposed to just repeat what they've learned, it is a little bit more time consuming. And that's both on the part of the instructor and the student. It's requiring them to use their brains more, which of course they don't want to do. They just want to do what you've already shown them. But also, as an instructor who's embracing authentic assessment, you really need to take the time to give personalized and informative feedback. And that takes more time. So grading takes a little bit longer. I mean, we love those multiple choice questions that just go straight through. And they do serve a purpose in assessment, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Another part of that takes a bit of time, but instructors need to focus on is that any essential performance criteria is very clearly presented. And what I mean by this is that the students know what to expect. They can see examples of A papers. They can see examples of failing papers. So they know what you're looking for from them. And authentic assessment should take place across the whole semester, which is why I'm trying to get you to think about the second point, going forward, how you could embrace this. And as such, it is really a balance of formative and summative assessments. And in order to describe formative and summative assessments in more detail, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Amarjit.
Hello, this is Amarjit Kaur from Bergen Community College. I work as Managing Director and look after Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning. Next slide, please. So I'd like to begin with sharing a thought from a faculty member who, after teaching this semester remotely, sent me a message. By now, I have realized that there is no mystique or magic to offering an online course. I'm interested in becoming a better teacher of online classes. Having tried technology to deliver instruction remotely, there is a desire to see how teaching translates to the meaningful learning experiences which my colleague alluded to. And that too, when majority of the communication from student to instructor and student to student involves nonverbal asynchronous correspondence, and where students depend even more on facilitation, assignment clarification, and feedback provided by their instructor. We all have been assessing students in our courses to gauge student learning, which in turn informs our own teaching. Some of the assessment are ongoing, others are delivered at the end of the course. Next slide. The former is called formative assessment. Formative assessment is used to monitor students' learning to provide ongoing feedback that can be used by instructors to improve their teaching and by students to improve their learning. As we transition to assessing online, it is not only important to break up learning into manageable chunks, but also build accountability on completion of each chunk that demonstrates knowledge and skill. To monitor acquisition of knowledge and provide feedback, a range of self-assessment activities such as adaptive quizzes for personalized learning, remote polling for immediate feedback, and online games for problem solving can prove to be extremely helpful to students in terms of trying out these exercises several times to master content. Traditionally, these activities are ungraded. To make sure students attend these activities, award a few points and count them towards the final grade. The other type of assessment is called summative assessment, which is used to evaluate students' learning at the end of an instructional unit by comparing it against some standard or benchmark. In many areas of study, tests are conducted at the middle and at the end of the semester to inform how well a student can apply their knowledge to new situations that demand judgment. In a virtual learning environment, journals and discussion forums can help students to reflect on past experiences, consider real-world implications, and guide future actions. Case studies using virtual field trips and simulated environment can help to determine if students can solve problems of real world and provide useful information as to where students have succeeded and where they have not succeeded to understand subject matter. On the other hand, students can create e-portfolio to collect their evidence of learning for future employees. Next slide, please. Using different types of assessment can help to accommodate different means of expression. As John Mueller in his work on attending assessment mentions, we all have different strengths and weaknesses in how we learn. Similarly, we are different in how we can best demonstrate what we have learned. Let's look at types of assessment more closely to help students learn better and attest in virtual environment. I turn over to Robert Obermeier from MercerOnline.
Hi, I'm Rob Obermeier. I'm an analyst at MercerOnline at Mercer County Community College. And I'll be talking about some examples of formative learning or formative assessments as we move forward. Next slide. My first point to you is, and what this cycle shows, is creating formative assessments is really what you do in your normal courses. It's what you build into your courses, in your classroom courses for interaction. And here, as we move into online learning, we build them into the activities that students perform so they can, so they begin to think through the processes and the movement that we want them to take in the program. Next slide. You want to use all the tools that you have available to you. And so some of the things that I've seen done, that I've done myself, for example, using discussions and wikis, I've taken and given each student in a class a question about the content we're covering now. And I have them work through, give them a couple days to work through that content and then post it. And then I give all the students a couple days to go through everybody's thread and comment, or at least just say they reviewed it. And then I go in at the end and I provide kind of final feedback. And I actually give people points for this. So for a good top of a thread, I'll give people 5 points. If somebody gives a good response, I'll give them 2 points. To start to build with them so they start to see what we're doing. And again, as Amarjit was talking about, you want to score these based on where you are in your course. So if you're in the beginning, what is it that's important they be doing? And as you move along, help them grow toward the midterm and the final so that they can do all the things you want. You know, in some other examples, every week I give a quiz, an 8-question quiz. I cover the materials we talked about, and 2 of the questions always cover the 2 items from last week that people didn't do well on. assignments. I have two ways for people to submit assignments, usually through the LMS, but I also create shared drive folders for each of my students, and I send each student a link to their folder. And I can either have them upload their assignment to the LMS, or if it's an assignment that's more appropriate, I have them put it into their folder and I can go in and grade it, and then they come back and look at it. It's a great backup if anything happens to the LMS and they need to submit something to me, they can do it that way. Video and audio, I've had, I had an instructor I worked with, they had each student go and create a video where they walked the instructor through solving the problem that they had been given. And the instructor then reviewed the video and then gave feedback using a video to the students. So the instructor in an online course got to see how the student was thinking through that process. Again, it's about innovation. It's about looking at what you normally do and then making sure that you use those, and again, give a few points each time you do it. I always, as I do these, I put the best items up into a discussion board and a wiki so students can see those, use them as grading points. Again, that first item I talked about becomes a great study item for all of the students. And the final two things I do is I create two major discussions. One is ask the instructor, one is ask your colleagues. And if someone asks me a great question, I give them a point. If someone asks a question of their colleagues, I give them a point. If someone responds to a colleague, I give them 2 points if they have a good response. And again, these become places where students can go, look at what questions were asked, look at the answers, and use those as study capabilities. I'm going to now pass on to Vicente and allow him to take us forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Vicente Erazo, manager of MercerOnline, Mercer County Community College. Next slide, please. I'll be discussing academic integrity in online and remote environment. Next slide. Every institution has their own version or definition of academic integrity. It's all about honesty, respect, trust, responsibility, and fairness. Unfortunately, cheating does occur in courses. For instructors, it's about having a strategy and knowing how to report infractions. Maintaining academic integrity in an online environment can be difficult. However, there are techniques, strategies, and tools you can use to prevent or deter cheating. This is very important for accreditation purposes. By you being proactive and maintaining the integrity of your course, as well as ensuring a high quality course for your students, you won't have any issues. Next slide, please. So let's go over some of those strategies and tools. First one is let's talk about it. It's important that you inform your students of your institution academic integrity policy and the honor code. Add the academic policy to your syllabus, add it to the course announcement. An email to your students before the course begins is helpful. Communicate with your students. Remind your students often and throughout the course. Add it to assignments and assessment instructions as well. This will remind the students to take it seriously. It'll keep them in line, but also keep the lines of communications open with your students, so your students are able to contact you if they have problems. Consequences. Besides informing your students about the academic integrity policy, educate the students about plagiarism and go over the penalties associated with infractions. Create a small quiz or discussion forums so students can reflect on the academic integrity policy. It ensures that the students are aware of the policy and consequences. You also have a record that you can refer the student back to if there is an infraction. The next part is pedagogical design. Design your content with reachable expectations. Be clear with your students on all assessments, assignments, and project. Frame the content so students can master the unit. Use authentic problems, and engage in open-ended questions or challenges. Use low-stake assessments or assignments so students can gauge their mastering of the content before a high-stake assignment. Design your assignments to be appropriate proportions of the final grade, and create assignments that include self-reflection. You can also create group assignments, possibly assign open book tests. You don't want to stress your students, especially during the times that we're facing. Another thing is change it up from time to time. Update your assignments and assessments from the previous term. Change the topics, possibly give an oral exam instead. Use the web conferencing tools that you might have available. Collaborate, Zoom, WebEx. Feedback. Now this is what I think is really important, is giving students feedbacks. Give your students feedback, especially when they're submitting a written assignment. Some students don't realize that they made a mistake. By giving them feedback, they can learn from their mistake. Give them recommendations. For example, you can recommend the Purdue Writing Lab OWL website, or refer them to the Learning Center, Tutoring Center, not as a punishment, but just as a way that they can learn more, and and give them the opportunity to resubmit assignments if there is an infraction. The other thing is resources and tools. Your LMS, utilize your learning management system settings and tools. For example, use question pools when creating high-stake assessments. Randomize the questions and set a time limit. Use the plagiarism detection tools like SafeAssign, Turnitin, or Unicheck. Use the rubrics when possible. If you do have high-stakes assessments and you're able to use third-party tools like proctoring services like Respondus or Lockdown Browser, HonorLock, Examity, and everyone's favorite ProctorU, use those for high-stake assessments. Utilize in-house resources as well. Utilize your learning center, your tutoring center for resources and workshops that your students can access online or attend. Contact your academic integrity committee if you have one of those, so they can share those resources with you that you can also share with your students. Ensure that you're also aware of how to report infractions as well. Academic integrity should not be framed on just misconduct and dishonesty or negative or punitive actions. You can take a different approach. It could be of a preventive education and a positive approach for your students. This will ensure student success. Thank you. I'd like to hand it over to our next presenter now.
Hello, my name is Archana Bhandari. I'm the Executive Director for Online Learning at Hudson County Community College. Next slide, please, Lee. I'm going to be talking about the best practices in assessment. One of the main things that one tends to forget, that assessment is a 360-degree process. It includes assessing the program, assessing the faculty and students. While we are focusing mainly on the student assessment, it is important to remember that program and faculty assessments are a critical part of the whole cycle of assessment. So complete the assessment cycle, and that will really help you improve all parts of your course and your actual program. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about the learning, the assessment cycle in 3 segments. The first part deals with learning outcomes and assessment measurement. You have already heard a lot about authentic assessment, formative and summative assessment, and how aligning with outcomes is important. This brings us to the fact that I really want to focus on that learning outcomes must be clearly defined, identified, and each should be assessed in some way. Make sure that all of the outcomes are assessed. It is easy to kind of miss out when you're kind of focusing on something that you feel important. So start the learning outcomes with the learning outcomes, and don't fall prey to the lure of glamorous tools. Be careful to have meaningful assessments with clearly stated purposes rather than making compromises to fit a specific tool. Have formative tests, as my colleagues have already mentioned. It is very helpful to have formative tests throughout your course, and have smaller assessments instead of a big stakes exam, which have a tendency to give skewed results. Big stake exams are not the best indicator of student learning. And if you try to incorporate multiple smaller assessments at each stage of the course and use formative assessments, this will help students to improve their performance as they go along in the course itself. The other thing is, don't be isolated. Discuss with experienced experts. So who are you going to discuss with? Apart from the faculty who are already in your area, who are teaching similar courses or are of the same division, you also have the Center for Online Learning or Distance Education expert professionals. This will help you to bounce ideas off and create synergy that will lead to better outcomes of assessments. The distance learning experts will help you to explore different tools, choices, and methods that are available to you. Be careful when you choose the measures. This is critical. Make sure that the measure actually truly captures what you're seeking to find out. This is true of all assessments, whether it's student, faculty, or program assessment. Choosing the measure is very, very important. Explicitly address accessibility. This is very key to inclusiveness. When assessing students, clearly address the accessibility. Let students know what support is there for them: software, accessibility services, help from distance education offices, or any other support. Make sure that student needs are met when needed. Whether you provide a scribe or a reading software, test your accessibility compliance. Next slide, please. So going to the next part, we are going to now talk about assessment tools and deployment. It is very important to find the appropriate tool. Finding best tools which do not work in your environment are not the best choice. Make sure that the tools you choose are actually appropriate to your environment, and do not be shy to go low tech. Instead, focus on the deeper and higher levels of assessment. Multiple choices quizzes may not be the right choice, though they are very popular. If you're looking for understanding, application, or creation, it doesn't fit. But it may be the best choice if you're looking to test memory, for example. So keeping in line with what has been said before, look to the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy and use different tools, but keep it simple. When you're deploying, you need to develop very clear guidelines. You have to make sure that the instructions are clear and complete, and the guidelines and procedures for assessment should be explicitly stated, not only in your syllabus, but addressed a week or so prior to the assessment. You should take the time to give an overview of them and give students an opportunity to ask questions about them. Avoid a single point of failure. Have a backup plan for any high-stake exams so you can avoid that single point of failure. Also, have multiple assessments instead of one single big one. That'll avoid a single point of failure. Provide practice exams for the students to test the tool and get familiar. Have question answer sessions before exams to ensure students get the opportunity to clarify any parts of the course where they're confused in. Provide rubrics with explicit scoring criteria. This does not mean that faculty lose their discretionary control, but it means that it will be clear to the student what is expected from them so that they can score better in their assessments. Next slide, please. And this is the final part of the cycle where assessments results and the course evolves with it. Giving timely and rich feedback is critical to student success. When you're correcting a student's submission, to make that effort to not only just grade them, but use comments for providing rich feedback to improve their learning throughout the course, gives them an opportunity to improve for future performances. Give them that chance to understand what they did wrong and do better the next time. Give them opportunities to show improvement by using multiple assessments instead of just one single one. When you finish the course, you can use the analytics to see where the assessments, student, or the course is weak to shore up your course for the next cycle. In assessments, you can use analytics to see questions, for example, in your exam, that a lot of students might not have done well in. And that will show you that either there is something wrong with the question and it needs to be changed or improved or clarified, or the students didn't have enough background to comprehend what was asked for, and so you need to shore up the students, or the course did not clearly address the topic. So you can use analytics to show you, shine a light on what needs to be improved. If the topic is difficult, one of the best practices is to provide multiple resources and chances for students to understand it. This is your opportunity to improve the entire course and give students the opportunity to improve the same way. So if you can scroll down a bit, the last part is when you get evaluations. When you get evaluations, you can use the evaluations provided to improve, the assessments in the course itself, and your own performance. Now, this is the hardest part because you have to be humble about this assessments you get, evaluations you get back from students. Sometimes it's hard to take a bitter pill after all your work. Just learning to accept the evaluations for what they are and to use them to shine a light on any changes that could improve the course and the student experience will help you to actually improve your course. Thank you, and I'm going to hand over now to Lee, who's going to lead you into resources. Thank you.
Okay, so what we've done, or what we started to do, is we began to compile a list of resources, and as you can see here, and all of this will be loaded on the College for Student Success or Center for Student Success website. So right now what we've provided you with is how to write good multiple choice questions, and we've provided you with the link, and also another article on authentic assessment in the online classroom. So we're going to turn it over to some of the questions, and I've been trying to monitor some of the chat while admitting people in here, but I did want to stress that and what we didn't stress in the very beginning is that each institution runs differently. Okay, so we all have different products in place, different learning management systems in place. We have different policies and rules and VPs and presidents. So whatever your institution is doing, we're not here to turn around and say this is how it should be done, but these are some of the tools that each of us use at Hudson, at Bergen, at Essex, at Ocean, at Middlesex. So if it works for one institution, it may not work for another. There were some questions on student engagement and the discussion questions, and I saw a couple people had responded back where you can encourage your students, obviously by grading them, and that would be once again with the rubric, and you can have them respond to 2 additional learners, okay? And that's where you're really forming that in-class discussion, and I'm still letting people in here, so forgive me. That's where you create that quote-unquote in-class discussion in an online environment. And as everybody in this room knows, is that we have moved quickly, very quickly across the state, across the nation, to emergency remote teaching, as we have dubbed it in most of our colleges. So we've tried to apply our online education or distance learning practices into this emergency remote teaching environment. What else? Integrity policies. So the integrity policies and plagiarism and cheating policies, yes, those are defined by your institutional policies, by your departments, your divisional chairs, and however it works. So when I think it was Vicente that was discussing it. So yes, the faculty member, they should have some type of syllabus, or in their syllabus, they should have that cheating or plagiarism policy in place in their syllabus. But once again, that is defined by the institution, the department, the division, however it works for that particular institution. So I do hope that that cleared that question up.
Hey, Lee, I just want to piggyback on a couple. As Lee had indicated for discussions, and we probably can do a webinar on discussions as a whole, because our last webinar that we provided is that you can be very creative with your discussions. It doesn't necessarily have to be content. You can do videos, you can do implement images. So there's an array. So we'll go ahead and put that on our list that we can talk about it. But engaging the students, facilitating the discussions, but more important, the students should be interacting and talking amongst themselves as you, the instructor, are helping them along to master the outcomes. And as Lee indicated with the academic integrity, dishonesty, every institution has their policy. But I want to say that there's no one fix all. You know, as we talk about the proctoring and the various vendors that provide it, it's a deterrent, right? So we're hoping that the students will study, but I want to give you an example. How many times have you was speeding down the road and you pass a police officer and you're like, oh my God, don't pull me over, and you get by? Meaning that you could do your best to maintain the integrity of your courses, but you're not going to get everyone. And I think that, in terms of your campaign and Ocean County College, we have even updated our policies to even deal with the technology that's going on. Students are very, very creative when they're cheating. One comment was in there. I don't know of any research that has been done, Lee, and I'll just open the discussion. Who cheats more, online or face-to-face? Cheating's cheating, okay? And so one thing that I know for Ocean County, we don't necessarily look only at online, but students are creative with the face-to-face. So I think it's an ongoing issue to just maintain the integrity of your institution. And that campaign should be taken with online and face-to-face.
Yeah, and one of the other things that we need to mention is, and we had, for those of you that were with us last week, each institution out of all the community colleges, we all use a different LMS system. So we have a number of users in Blackboard, Canvas. There's two or three of us that actually use Moodle. And don't forget, a lot of these tools may not be compatible, or they have extra steps that have to go into the LMS. So if you have recommendations, or if you're looking for something, you really need to speak to your distance learning group to see about getting those tools that you may want to include possibly in your class course, or possibly make that recommendation. But know that this group, we're always looking for different things to do, and they're on the cutting edge, especially my colleagues in the Affinity group. So you really need to work with them. And in terms of, there was another question, and I'm not sure where it was going, but it had to do with faculty assessment. So I'm assuming that would be the course assessment or the overall faculty member assessment for the for the instructor for that semester. That would, I'm assuming, once again, it depends on the institution, but that would probably have to go through your IR department, your institutional research department, or I know here at Essex, we have our contractual faculty assessment. It's in our LMS. It's actually embedded within the course. I'm sure my colleagues do the same thing on some type of level. So really, once again, if you have those specific questions, I would really refer those to your distance education group to see how you can, to get those faculty assessments in, if that's it. And I hope I cleared up your question. So I think, and did I miss any questions? My colleagues out there who are monitoring the chat line with me?
No, you've covered all of them. There's some comments coming in, and we appreciate everyone sharing their resources and information inside the chat area.
I think you got all of them, Lee. We've been answering as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I see a lot going on here. Yeah, and once again, Chromebooks, I know there was a comment that, first of all, certain tools, once again, they're not compatible with everything. So I know Chromebooks are a major issue with respondents. So, and don't forget, Chromebooks are inexpensive, so a lot of students have them. So if you are working with ProctorU or Examiny or Respondus or HonorLock, it may or may not work. And yes, students they're finding new ways, okay, to cheat, so to speak. And that's why we as faculty and administrators, we need to stay one step ahead of that game. And that's what this presentation was about, to give you those ideas on how to assess possibly weekly, instead of giving that student that final exam where it's worth 200 points or 35% of their final grade. Give them those, quizzes every week or some type of other assessment in order to, make sure that they're really, learning the material, because really that's what it's about. Are they learning the material, right? And I think we have everything. I'm still reading some of the comments.
Yeah.
So.
There's another question from Crystal. And how do we sensitively address plagiarism with a student when it does occur? Once again, as Lee indicated, we want to encourage you to look at your institution's policy and procedure. They're usually very clear about it and the steps that you should do. If you're not sure, I want to also ask you, maybe you can speak with the coordinator, the chair, or even the dean to make sure that you're following the best practices at your institution and the policy.
Yeah, and you can actually, and if you want to take it a step further, you can actually call that student and say, hey, what's going on over here? I noticed that you took this chunk from, this article, you didn't cite it properly, and make it also a teachable moment. I found with my own students that when I find them plagiarizing, typically it's, oh, I forgot to cite, or, oh, I forgot to cite my resources, or, oh, I forgot my quotations, or something along those lines. But you make it a teachable moment, and then you let them know gently, like, listen, if it happens again, I'm going to have to go to this next step. And that could be to the department chair or, whatever that level is at your institution. So, or as Mr. Sullivan just said, I give them a chance to redo, their paper. So that's another option too. I've done that as well. So I think, really, it depends on your class, your rapport with the students, how many times the student has attempted to do it. That's another thing.
Right, and I think it's also the levels, because most institutions has different levels of cheating. Level 1, and you don't want to be punitive. Lee is right in terms of making it a teachable moment. However, this topic is a big discussion. We're dealing with it at OCC as well as the other institutions, contract cheating, students using VPNs to mask, taking the test. We can go on and continue to talk about this, but I think this will be a topic that we can focus all together on: academic integrity, dishonesty, and what we can do to combat it. And so I think it's a win-win, but once again, it's like that speeding down the road, some may get through, some may get pulled over. And so You can do your best to do it. But I think when these students see these roadblocks in place, our ultimate goal is that they study, that they master the learning outcomes, and ultimately do well in the progression of their education, that journey.
I'd also like to warn people that some of the anti-plagiarism tools, they actually, you know, if a student repeats their own work as well, it red flags them as well. So it depends on your, where you're coming from, whether you cheat, whether you consider that a cheating or not, their own material being reused. You know, it's things that, yeah, sometimes, I mean, red flags turn up in the proctoring as well, and it's really not cheating. So, I mean, I think cheating online is as rampant as off, you know, doing it on face-to-face but it's just harder to catch, and that's what we are dealing with.
Yeah, and I just want to bring up a really quick point. I teach online. I had a student 2 semesters ago. She took my class, you know, prior to that, and she actually resubmitted the same paper, and obviously it came up 100% plagiarized in Turnitin because it was already in the database. I made her do it over again because even though it was her original work originally, she still didn't work on it. So we had to kind of, you know, fight about that a little bit. But, you know, I made her change it up a little bit because I wanted her to dig a little bit more deeply into it because the first paper wasn't that good. But anyway, the point being is that, listen, students are going to find a way, just like anything. And I know Vivian used a great analogy with the car. So that's great. You know, either you have the ones that are right staying on the road or those that are going off onto the curb. So anyway, I think we're almost done here. So in terms of new or additional presentations, so next week we're going to have another one, and you'll be seeing that invite come out from Dr. Farbman, right? And I believe we're doing it on virtual meetings. So we'll be focusing next week on Zoom, Collaborate, WebEx, and some other alternatives, and how to really utilize those tools within your classroom, whether, once again, whether it's online education or whether it's for this emergency remote teaching that we're all going through. So that'll be next week. And then the following week, we're going to be doing a presentation on student affairs and what some colleges have been doing to bring their students in terms of advisement, registration, trying to keep them involved in a campus culture, but now we're in a virtual campus culture. So that will be in 2 weeks. So we'll be presenting that as well. Jake?
So thank you everybody for your time. And just one last thing before we call it a presentation. One of the things we also want to start focusing on as we continue to expand this webinar series is content specific, course content specific. So for those of you who are teaching online or remotely in chemistry, in mathematics, in English, in developmental education, if you've utilized these tools and found ways to engage your students, to improve student success, to keep your students engaged throughout the entire semester in the process, things of that nature. If you've got best practices and innovations that you'd like to share with us and you'd like to be featured in one of these webinars, please email me. You should have my email address and the information you received for this webinar, and we'll reach out and get you lined up to be one of our presenters. So with all of that, thank you all for joining. Thank our presenters for sharing their expertise with us. We hope to see you all again real soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Great job, presenters.
Bye. Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Nora. Thank you, Dr. Nora.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
I think we have to end the recording.
I'm doing